For instance, Buzz Aldrin's first-person testimony in his own books. He talks about how Jay Barbary, who was a colleague of mine from NBC News, I knew Jay back when I was with Cronkite. I was just a young whippersnapper, and Jay is now this senior space correspondent still covering the shuttle for NBC, asking very perceptive questions from the press corps. Jay innocently invited Buzz to I think it was a Kiwanis Club meeting up in Palmdale, which is one of the NASA facilities north of Los Angeles, where they, in fact, have tested a lot of the components of the secret space program and the secret military program, including the shuttle. And so he invites him into this meeting, a whole bunch of rah-rah, jet jockeys and engineers, and, the old slap you on the back, good old boy network. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And he asks, they're sitting on stage, and they got two chairs, and it's like very conversation. And he says to Buzz, Jay asks Buzz, well, what did it feel like to walk on the moon for the first time? And in his own book, Buzz Aldrin says that at that moment he became violently ill. Oh. He had to rush off the stage. He went out to the alley and he threw up.
Wow. And
his wife came out all upset because she thought something was seriously wrong, which of course it was. This is classic aversion therapy. Mm-hmm. Classic aversion therapy. Mm-hmm. So yes, I believe the astronauts are blameless. Mm. All except for Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
I think Neil Armstrong fully has his memories. Mm-hmm. I think Neil Armstrong, as the icon, first person of the human family now to walk on the moon, mm-hmm. has been left alone. And that is why Neil Armstrong never says anything in public about the space program. They wind him up and bring him out at a couple of these ceremonies. Like in 1994, he was at the White House with President Clinton and a bunch of students, and it was a whole arranged photo op. And he stands there making a speech, and I had someone the other night analyze the body language and his voice and talk about how incredibly nervous and incredibly upset he appeared to be, which you can see on tape. We have the tape. And what he started out by doing was comparing all the astronauts, the entire astronaut corps, all his colleagues who landed on the moon, to parrots. Mm. He said, and parrots don't fly very well. Parrots also don't tell you the truth. Oh my. They tell you what they're told. At the end of his speech, he turned to the students, because students represent, of course, the next generation. The perfect photo op. Always plant students in your audience so you make people think you're concerned about the next generation. Mm-hmm. He looked at them, he kind of calmed down at this point, and he said, there are wonders beyond belief on the moon for those who can remove truth's protective layers. Now, I was never taught in school that truth had protective layers. Who's protecting the truth? Mm-hmm. He was obviously referring to Brookings, to NASA, to 40 years of lies.
I have a couple of questions as well. Once again, the risk of irritating you here, Richard. There will be many people who've read your book from cover to cover, and they also read Dark Moon, and they looked at those images, and I know you're familiar with those images. They're the ones where the crosshairs seem to be behind the image rather than in front of the image. Mm-hmm. They're the ones where you seem to have multiple lighting effects in terms of multiple shadows. Now, those are good questions to raise again. I know that you have dismissed those. Can you just explain briefly on what grounds you have done that?
Well, dismissing is if you don't deal with it. What we have done on Enterprise and in Dark Mission is we have dealt with most of the common questions very effectively and very scientifically, and I think we have been able to put the issue to rest, because what people who naively raise some of those questions don't know is the secret technology that was used to take the pictures. For instance, this super extraordinary color film. If you take that film and you make a first-generation copy in the camera, and then you take that copy when you bring it back to Earth and you make other copies, what you can do, because you have such latitude, is you adjust between the light and the dark so that it looks as if it's a perfectly lit with floodlights, spotlights, fill light picture, when in fact it was the film. It was the technology, the secret hidden technology of Charlie Wyckoff's XRC film that allow them to do that. In terms of multiple shadows, no, they're not multiple shadows. There appear to be multiple angles. And these are people that don't understand how shadow angles depend on surface, landscape geometry, hills, valleys, craters, where rocks are. Then there's the common canard that they couldn't see stars. Well, Ken Johnston reports, remember he's the official guy in charge of the photographs in the Lunar Receiving Laboratory from Apollo, told by his people to eventually destroy all but one set of the films, who walked through one building one day and noticed that there were a group of people, 3 or 4 people, who were doing something with negatives and paint. They were painting out the sky above the horizon. And as any good manager at NASA, he said, "What the hell are you doing?" And the answer was, "Oh, we're strippers," which is a kind of a flip answer, because that's a term that comes from Hollywood, where they would make matte paintings and they would strip them into the background film so that in Forbidden Planet, you see the illusion of the monster against the Chesley Bonstell painting of the twin moon alien world, Altair 4, that the expedition landed on. So he explores a little further and he says, "Well, what are you really doing?" Well, the guy in charge of these several women that were doing this, they were women, by the way, he said, "Well, what we're doing is we're painting out the stars so that it doesn't confuse people." Now, the stars, as part of the original NASA photograph, have been a major cause of concern to a lot of these people who've been concerned that you don't see stars on a lunar picture, and they think naively that you should. Well, in fact, if you take a picture in the daytime on the moon, you're not going to see stars. The reason is the stars are so incredibly faint, and the sun is so bright that you cannot expose one picture that will be decent exposure of the surface and see the stars at the same time. You can do this on any day or night here on Earth. Go out on a moonlit night or moonless night and try to get stars and then have someone light up the foreground with floodlights, and you'll quickly see the foreground will totally overexpose even with weak, feeble artificial illumination, because the stars are so incredibly weak that you can't record the two on the same shot. Significantly for what Ken says to us is that the people who were doing the painting out obviously were painting out this stuff. They were painting out the glass ruins, the sparkles, the pieces of glass that just at the right angle would kick sunlight back into the camera lens, and it would be unmistakable. There was something there in the sky that should not be there. The fact that they thought that they were painting out the stars and not the glass means they also believed the lie. The lie was different at every level, and at their level of the lie, they have been told, "We're getting rid of the stars because they'd be confusing." So it's an internally consistent story that has elements of first-person testimony, photographic evidence, corroboration on the web all over the world now from someone leaking amazing, untouched generation versions, probably scanned from these original XR Ektachrome transparencies. And it all fits together as a coherent whole that NASA has been suppressing real lunar ruins for over 40 years.
Somebody who is a valuable insider source of ours, I had the good fortune to be able to talk with him at length just a very short while ago. And I know that you are very suspicious of any insider's testimony, and I understand why. But let me show you the story. And although we had...
Well, it's not accompanied by physical evidence.
Of course.
See, the difference from Ken is he had an actual set of physical prints.
I understand that.
Which hold up.
Yeah, I understand that. But this is a kind of conversation that we could have had over dinner last night and we didn't have it. I asked this guy and had a lot of conversations with him about a lot of things. And I thought, I've never asked him whether we went to the moon or not. And I said, "Hey, did we really go to the moon?" And there was the longest silence. And I didn't know what he was going to say. It was like a really, really long pause. And eventually he said, "Yes." And he said, "But it wasn't that simple," he said. He said, "We went there with help." He said, "We had advanced technology that was not part of the formal Apollo program, was not part of accepted science at that time, but helped us get through the Van Allen belts. And actually was also built into the LEM that enabled it to take off. without leaving the blast crater and so on and so forth.
Uh-huh.
And he said,